Hello dreamers, hope you are doing well today. So my dear friends, before we begin, please subscribe if you haven't already. Your support keeps me going and it motivates me every day. Tonight, we journey into the fog-shrouded streets of Silent Hill, not to follow the footsteps of a lost traveler or tormented soul, but to understand the architect of so much suffering. We explore the story of Dahlia Gillespie, a woman whose fanatical devotion to her religion led her to commit the unthinkable, burning her own 7-year-old daughter alive. Dahlia stands as one of the most complex and disturbing villains in horror gaming, a mother who chose her God over her child, power over love, and paradise over humanity. Her actions set in motion events that would corrupt an entire town and echo through the lives of countless victims. This is not just the story of a villain, but an examination of how faith twisted into fanaticism can transform a mother into a monster. Now, settle into your pillows, close your eyes, and let's begin our journey into the darkness that consumed Dahlia Gillespie and the daughter she sacrificed. To understand Dahlia Gillespie, we must first understand the town that shaped her and the beliefs that consumed her. Silent Hill, Maine, a small resort town nestled somewhere in the northeastern United States, appears peaceful on the surface. Tourists once flocked to its scenic lake shores, charming streets, and the promise of small-town tranquility. But beneath this facade lurked something ancient and malevolent, a spiritual power that had corrupted the land long before any modern settlement took root. The town was built upon ground that Native Americans had once considered sacred, a place where the veil between worlds grew thin, where nightmares could bleed into reality. Within this cursed town operated a religious organization known simply as the Order. This was no ordinary cult. The Order had existed for generations, its roots stretching back centuries, intertwining with the very foundation of Silent Hill itself. They worshipped their own deity, a being they called by many names, the creator of paradise, the Lord of serpents and reeds, the Holy Mother, and sometimes Samael. According to their mythology, this god had descended to earth in ancient times to relieve humanity of suffering. She had created a paradise, a perfect world without pain, hunger, sickness, old age, greed, or war. But in doing so, the god's strength was depleted, and she collapsed, promising to return if her followers remained faithful. The Order's ultimate goal was to bring about the apocalypse and deliver the faithful to this promised paradise. They believed that their God must be reborn into the physical world, and that this rebirth would cleanse humanity of sin and corruption. Different sects within the Order had varying interpretations of their beliefs and different methods to achieve their goals. The sect of the Holy Woman, the branch that Dahlia would come to lead, believed that God could be born through fire, that suffering and pain would nurture the deity growing within a chosen vessel. This was not a belief in salvation through kindness or enlightenment, but through torment and sacrifice. The order was deeply embedded in Silent Hill's social structure. They influenced local government, businesses, and institutions. They ran the Wish House orphanage, where they indoctrinated children into their beliefs and sometimes subjected them to horrific abuse. They had connections with Al Camilla Hospital, the local medical facility that would become central to their most terrible ritual. The order's influence was so pervasive that they could commit atrocities and have them covered up, their crimes hidden behind false narratives and bureaucratic manipulation. Into this environment, Dahlia Gillespie was born and raised. Little is known about her early life or what led her to embrace the order's teachings so completely. Perhaps she was born into the cult, raised from childhood to believe in their twisted vision of paradise. Perhaps she sought power and saw the order as her path to obtaining it. Whatever her origins, Dahlia rose through the ranks to become a priestess and eventually the leader of the sect of the Holy Woman. She was a Miko, a spiritualistic medium who claimed to commune with the divine and channel supernatural forces. Dahlia established herself as a prominent figure in Silent Hill. She owned and operated the Green Lion Antique Store in the town's business district, a shop that served as both a legitimate business and a front for her more sinister activities. The store was filled with occult items, mystical artifacts, and religious paraphernalia that reflected her deep involvement in the order's practices. Some customers whispered that Dahlia also offered other services: fortune-telling, magic spells, and spiritual consultations for those willing to pay. But these rumors only scratched the surface of Dahlia's true activities. Behind her respectable facade, Dahlia was involved in criminal enterprises that would fund the order's operations and increase her personal power. She became a key player in Silent Hill's drug trade, specifically dealing in a hallucinogenic substance called PTV. This drug was derived from a plant indigenous to the region called White Claudia, which grew near water and bore white flowers. The seeds of White Claudia contained powerful hallucinogenic properties and had been used in ancient religious ceremonies. Dahlia had the plant refined into PTV, a recreational drug that became popular with tourists visiting Silent Hill. Her partner in this criminal enterprise was Dr. Michael Kaufmann, the director of Al Camilla Hospital. Kaufmann's medical position gave him access to pharmaceutical supplies and the authority to distribute drugs without arousing suspicion. He worked alongside a colleague named Norman Young, and together with Dahlia, they created a profitable drug trafficking operation. The order itself was involved in distributing PTV to tourists and using it in their own rituals, where its hallucinogenic effects served their mystical purposes. The drug trade brought considerable profits, which Dahlia used to expand her influence and further the Order's goals. This criminal activity had deadly consequences. Dahlia's drug operation drew the attention of law enforcement. A narcotics officer named Gucci began investigating the drug trafficking in Silent Hill, getting dangerously close to exposing Dahlia and the Order. At the same time, Silent Hill's mayor, an anti-drug advocate, was pushing for a crackdown on the substance abuse that was tarnishing the town's reputation as a resort destination. Both of these obstacles to Dahlia's operation meant mysterious and untimely deaths. While it was never proven, evidence suggests that Dahlia was directly involved in their murders, eliminating anyone who threatened to expose her criminal empire. But the drug trade, the murders, and the accumulation of power were all secondary to Dahlia's true obsession. Her supreme goal was to bring the Order's God into the physical world, to trigger the rebirth that would bring about paradise on earth. However, Dahlia's interest was not purely spiritual. She craved personal power, the ability to control forces beyond human understanding, to be the mother of God and wield influence over the new world that would be created. This ambition would drive her to commit acts of unspeakable cruelty, starting with the daughter she would bring into the world. Dahlia gave birth to a daughter whom she named Alessa Gillespie. The identity of Alessa's father remains unknown, and some sources suggest that Alessa may have been created through magical conjuration rather than natural conception. Regardless of her origins, Alessa was extraordinary from birth. She possessed supernatural abilities that manifested early in her childhood: telekinesis, levitation, premonition, and astral projection. She could move objects with her mind, sense danger before it occurred, and even project her consciousness beyond her physical body. Some accounts suggest that Alessa could kill someone simply by wishing them dead, projecting her desire into their body until it became reality. These powers should have been nurtured and protected, but instead, they made Alessa's childhood a living nightmare. The Order had long sought a vessel capable of birthing their god. They had attempted to impregnate several young girls with the god fetus, but none had survived the trauma of the impregnation process. The girls' deaths were covered up, their sacrifices known only to the cult's inner circle. But when Dahlia realized the extent of Alessa's supernatural abilities, she saw her daughter not as a child to be loved, but as the perfect vessel for God's rebirth. Dahlia began indoctrinating Alessa into the Order's beliefs from an early age. She taught her daughter about the cult's faith, about the God they worshipped, and about the paradise that would come when the deity was reborn. Dahlia raised Alessa within the Gillespie house, a home that should have been filled with love and warmth, but instead became a place of religious fanaticism and abuse. The house itself would become infamous, its design inspired by the Olsen house in Maine, the same building depicted in Andrew Wyeth's painting, Christina's World. Inside, the walls bore paintings that reflected the darkness of its inhabitants, including, according to some accounts, an image of Pyramid Head, an executioner figure from Silent Hill's dark history. Alessa's supernatural abilities made her an outcast at Midwich Elementary School. Children are often cruel to those who are different, and Alessa's classmates were no exception. They bullied her mercilessly, branded her a witch, and told her to kill herself. Her desk was graffitied with hateful messages: "Drop dead and go home," carved into the wood. The abuse was relentless, driven by fear and misunderstanding, but also encouraged by the whispers of parents who were either ignorant of or complicit in the Order's activities. The children who tormented Alessa had no idea that their cruelty was feeding into something far darker, that her suffering and anger were building toward a terrible reckoning. In this environment of isolation and abuse, Alessa found few sources of comfort. One was a young girl named Claudia Wolfe, daughter of Leonard Wolfe, a fellow member of the Order. Claudia was a couple of years younger than Alessa, but she sympathized with the older girl's suffering. She understood what it meant to be trapped in the Order's grasp, to be subject to their doctrines and their cruelty. Claudia's father subjected her to horrific physical and emotional abuse, beating her for any behavior he deemed irreligious. In their shared suffering, Alessa and Claudia formed a deep bond. Claudia was perhaps the only person who truly understood Alessa, the only friend she had in a world that seemed determined to torment her. Another figure who showed Alessa kindness was Lisa Garland, a nurse who worked at Alchemilla Hospital. Lisa was training to become a full nurse, harboring dreams of one day becoming an actress despite coming from a family tradition of nursing. She was young, compassionate, and seemed genuinely concerned for the well-being of her patients. Lisa would later be forced into a terrible role in Alessa's story, manipulated by Dr. Kaufmann and the Order into participating in acts that would haunt her beyond death. As Alessa grew older, Dahlia's plans for her daughter crystallized. The girl was 7 years old when Dahlia decided that the time had come to fulfill her destiny as the vessel for God. Dahlia had calculated that Alessa's powers were strong enough to contain and nurture the deity through the birth process. She had bound Alessa's abilities with a mystical device called the Floros, a pyramid-shaped artifact that could trap and contain supernatural power. Everything was in place for the ritual that would change Silent Hill forever and condemn Alessa to years of unimaginable torment. The events that would destroy Alessa's life and corrupt Silent Hill began with careful preparation. Dahlia had spent years planning the ritual that would impregnate her daughter with the god fetus. According to the sect of the Holy Woman's beliefs, God would be born from fire, and the vessel must be molded with suffering and pain. This was not metaphorical language. The ritual itself would involve setting Alessa ablaze, burning her body to create the perfect conditions for God to take root within her. The setting for this horrific ceremony was the Gillespie house itself, specifically the cellar beneath their home. Dahlia was confident in her abilities as a spiritualistic medium. She believed that with Alessa as the vessel, she did not need the formal ritual sites that the order typically used for their ceremonies. The ritual could be performed anywhere, and performing it in her own home gave her complete control over the process and helped ensure secrecy. The basement of the Gillespie residence would become the crucible, where a child's innocence was sacrificed for a God's rebirth. The exact details of the ritual remain shrouded in mystery, but the outcome was clear and devastating. Dahlia performed the impregnation ceremony, subjecting 7-year-old Alessa to occult practices designed to force the god fetus into her body. The ritual involved extensive use of fire, flames that would engulf the child and leave her body covered in burns. Whether the fire was an intended part of the ceremony or whether something went catastrophically wrong remains a subject of debate. Some believe that Alessa, in her terror and desperation, may have accidentally triggered a boiler explosion with her psychic powers, causing an uncontrolled conflagration. Others maintain that Dahlia intentionally set her daughter on fire as part of the ritual, that the burning was always the plan. What is certain is that on that terrible day, the Gillespie house became an inferno. The flames were so intense that they spread beyond the basement, consuming the upper floors and eventually burning down the entire structure. The fire was so severe that it spread to neighboring houses in the business district. Official reports would later claim that 6 houses burned down, though the exact location of the fire could not be pinpointed on maps of the business district, perhaps due to the supernatural nature of the event or deliberate falsification of records. As the flames consumed the Gillespie house, Alessa suffered injuries that should have killed her. She received countless 3rd-degree and 4th-degree burns across her body, wounds so severe that survival should have been impossible. Her skin was charred, her flesh burned away in places, leaving her in a state that would haunt anyone who saw her by all natural laws. Alessa should have died in that basement, consumed by the flames her mother had unleashed. But Alessa did not die, and her survival was not mercy. It was the beginning of a far worse fate. The ritual, despite its horrific violence, had succeeded in its primary goal. The god fetus had been implanted within Alessa's body. The malevolent deity growing inside her served as a protective force, preventing her from dying despite her catastrophic injuries. Additionally, Dahlia had cast a powerful magical incantation over her daughter, a summoning spell that would keep Alessa alive no matter how much her body failed, no matter how much she wanted to die. This spell ensured that Alessa would linger in a state between life and death, trapped in her broken body, suffering endlessly. But just when Dahlia believed her plan was succeeding, Alessa fought back with the only weapon she had left, her supernatural powers. In her moment of greatest agony, Alessa performed an act of desperate resistance. She split her soul in half, using a form of bilocation to separate her consciousness into two distinct entities. One half remained in her burned body in Silent Hill, while the other half was shaped into something new, a baby, pure and untainted by the trauma Alessa had endured. This infant manifestation of Alessa's soul contained her innocence, her hope, everything good that remained in her before the burning. The soul splitting had a crucial effect on Dahlia's plans. Although the god was now inside Alessa's body, growing and developing, the vessel was incomplete. With only half of her soul remaining, Alessa did not have enough power to give birth to the deity. The ritual had succeeded in creating a pregnancy of sorts, but the birth was indefinitely delayed. Dahlia's grand plan, her ultimate goal of bringing God into the world, was frozen at the threshold of completion. She would need to find a way to reunite Alessa's split soul to complete the birth process. The fire and Alessa's supposed death had to be explained to the residents of Silent Hill. Dahlia and the Order orchestrated an elaborate cover-up to hide the truth of what had happened. They spread the story that the Gillespie house fire was caused by a malfunction of an antiquated boiler, an accident rather than a ritualistic immolation. A newspaper article was published promoting this explanation, and the residents of Silent Hill, most of whom knew nothing of the Order's true activities, accepted this narrative. They mourned the apparent death of young Alessa Gillespie, a girl who many had mistreated in life but could now pity in death. To make the cover story more convincing, Dr. Kaufmann prepared a substitute body, another dead child whose remains were presented as Alessa's corpse. He likely also performed a false autopsy to provide official documentation of Alessa's death. To the public, Alessa was gone, a tragic victim of an unfortunate accident. But within the Order, Alessa was elevated to sainthood. They declared her the Holy Mother of God and Daughter of God, Saint Alessa, who had willingly sacrificed herself for their deity. This was a cruel irony. Alessa, who despised the Order and everything they represented, was canonized by the very religion that had destroyed her. In reality, Alessa was very much alive, hidden away in the basement of Alchemilla Hospital. Dahlia and Dr. Kaufmann had transported her burned body to a secret room in the hospital's lowest level, a place where no unauthorized personnel were allowed. Only a select few knew the truth. Dahlia herself, Dr. Kaufmann, a handful of Order members, and one young nurse who would be forced to care for the suffering child. Alessa's condition in the hospital was beyond description. Her body was covered in bandages that constantly needed changing because her wounds would not heal. Blood and pus seeped through the dressings, the injuries perpetually fresh and agonizing. She suffered from an extremely high fever that never broke, her body burning from within as much as it had burned from without. She could barely breathe, each inhalation a struggle, each moment an eternity of pain. The God growing inside her was feeding off her nightmares, off her suffering and fear, using her torment as nourishment. Dahlia's magical incantation ensured that Alessa could not die. The spell kept her alive in this horrific state, preventing her burns from healing, but also preventing her from finding the release of death. Alessa was trapped in an endless nightmare, a coma from which she could not wake, but which offered no escape from awareness. Her conscious mind was locked in a state of perpetual agony, experiencing every moment of her suffering without the mercy of unconsciousness or the finality of death. The psychological and spiritual effects of this prolonged torment were profound. Alessa's nightmares, given power by her supernatural abilities and the God growing inside her, began to manifest in reality. The town of Silent Hill started to change, to warp and twist in response to Alessa's subconscious mind. An alternate reality began to form, a place that would come to be known as the other world. This was Silent Hill as Alessa experienced it in her nightmares, a place of rust and decay, of blood-stained walls and endless corridors where reality itself became fluid and terrifying. The other world was populated by manifestations of Alessa's fears and memories. The monsters that would terrorize Silent Hill were born from her traumatized psyche. Each creature represented something that frightened or disturbed her. The double heads, strange two-headed dog-like creatures, represented both Alessa's fear of dogs and her soul split in two. The puppet doctors, with their grotesque forms and medical associations, reflected her fear and hatred of the doctors who kept her alive in her torment. Every horror that would eventually plague Silent Hill had its origin in the nightmares of a 7-year-old girl being kept in perpetual agony. The care of this suffering child fell primarily to Lisa Garland, the young nurse who had once shown Alessa kindness. But Lisa's role was not voluntary. Dr. Kaufmann had a hold over her. She had become addicted to PTV, the very drug that Dahlia and Kaufmann were trafficking. Kaufmann used this addiction as leverage, threatening Lisa with withdrawal if she did not comply with his demands. He blackmailed her into caring for Alessa, into being complicit in keeping the girl alive despite the obvious cruelty of doing so. Lisa's diary entries from this period reveal her growing horror at what she was witnessing. She wrote about her patient, whose wounds would not heal, who remained alive despite injuries that should have been fatal. Lisa did not understand at first what was happening. But as months turned into years, she began to realize the supernatural nature of Alessa's condition. She was trapped in the same prison as Alessa, forced to participate in the girl's suffering, unable to escape because of her addiction and the Order's power over her. For 7 years, this situation persisted. 7 years of Alessa lying in that hospital basement, her body slowly healing superficially, but never truly recovering. Her mind trapped in endless nightmares, the God inside her feeding and growing. 7 years of Lisa changing bandages and administering care to a patient who should not be alive. 7 years of Dahlia waiting, plotting, searching for a way to complete her ritual and bring about God's birth. 7 years of Silent Hill slowly transforming, the other world seeping into the fabric of reality, the spiritual corruption spreading like a cancer through the town. But Dahlia was not idle during these 7 years. She had learned that Alessa's soul had split, and she understood that the baby created from that split soul was the key to completing the ritual. She needed to find that child and bring her back to Silent Hill to reunite with Alessa's other half. To accomplish this, Dahlia maintained her summoning spell on Alessa, keeping her in constant pain. The spell had another purpose beyond preventing death. It created a subconscious connection between the two halves of Alessa's soul. Through this connection, the baby would feel echoes of Alessa's suffering, a subtle pull drawing her back to Silent Hill. The baby that had been created from Alessa's split soul had been found by the side of a road outside Silent Hill by Harry Mason and his wife Jody. They were a childless couple, unable to have children due to Jody's illness. Finding an abandoned infant seemed like a miracle, and they adopted the baby, naming her Cheryl. Harry and Jody raised Cheryl as their own daughter, giving her the love and normal childhood that Alessa had been denied. When Cheryl was 3 years old, Jody succumbed to her illness and passed away, leaving Harry to raise Cheryl alone. Harry Mason had no idea of Cheryl's true origins. He had no knowledge of Silent Hill, the Order, or the suffering of a burned girl lying in a hospital basement. He was simply a father trying to do right by his adopted daughter, trying to give her a good life despite the loss of her mother. But Cheryl was not completely free of her connection to Alessa. The subconscious link between the two halves of the soul persisted, and as Cheryl grew older, she would occasionally experience strange feelings, inexplicable dreams, and an increasing pull towards a town she had never consciously visited. 7 years after the ritual, when Cheryl was 7 years old, the same age Alessa had been when she was burned, Dahlia's plan bore fruit. Cheryl suggested to Harry that they take a vacation to Silent Hill. She did not understand why this particular destination called to her, but the pull was undeniable. Harry, wanting to honor his daughter's wishes and perhaps sensing something important in her request, agreed. They set out on a journey that would lead Harry into the heart of Silent Hill's nightmare and bring Cheryl face to face with her other half. As Harry and Cheryl approach Silent Hill, Alessa sensed their coming. Despite being trapped in her hospital bed, despite the constant pain and the nightmares, Alessa remained aware. Her supernatural powers had not diminished. If anything, they had grown stronger during her 7 years of torment. She sent out an astral projection of herself, a ghostly form that materialized on the road ahead of Harry's vehicle. Harry swerved to avoid hitting what appeared to be a young girl standing in the middle of the road, and the vehicle crashed. Harry was knocked unconscious, and when he woke, Cheryl was gone. This marked the beginning of the events depicted in the first Silent Hill game, and it was also the culmination of Dahlia's 7-year wait. The pieces were finally in place for her to complete the ritual, to reunite Alessa's split soul and force the birth of God. But before this could happen, an unexpected complication arose in the form of Travis Grady, a trucker whose intervention 7 years earlier had given Alessa the chance to split her soul in the first place. The events that led to Alessa's burning and soul splitting are explored in detail in Silent Hill. Origins, a prequel to the first game. On the night of the ritual, 7 years before Harry's arrival in Silent Hill, Travis Grady was driving his truck through the area when he spotted the Gillespie house engulfed in flames. Travis was a man with his own troubled past, haunted by childhood trauma, but he did not hesitate when he saw the burning building. He stopped his truck and rushed toward the house, driven by instinct to help. Inside the burning structure, Travis found a young girl. Her body severely burned, but somehow still alive. This was Alessa, lying on the floor where Dahlia's ritual had left her. Travis carried the girl out of the inferno, her charred body in his arms, the flames licking at them both. He managed to escape the building just before it collapsed, saving Alessa from burning to death in the wreckage. When he emerged from the house, Travis briefly saw a woman near the scene, Dahlia, watching from a distance, having fled when the ritual went awry. Travis collapsed outside the burning house, and when he woke, he found himself in Silent Hill, the town transformed by Alessa's awakening power. The Order had taken Alessa's body to a secret ritual site located beneath Dahlia's antique shop, the Green Lion. There, they prepared to complete the impregnation ritual that had been interrupted by Travis's intervention. Alessa, despite her terrible injuries, was not helpless. Through astral projection, she reached out to Travis's mind, using him as a conduit for her power. Throughout Travis's journey through Silent Hill, Origins, Alessa guided him using various means. She created a drawn children's map that led him through the town, showing him where he needed to go. She appeared to him in visions and dreams, cryptic and often silent, using him for her purposes even as he tried to understand what was happening. Alessa's goal was to create the Floros, the mystical artifact that could contain supernatural power. With Travis's unwitting help, she succeeded in constructing this device. During Travis's exploration, he encountered Dahlia multiple times. At Cedar Grove Sanitarium, she confronted him directly, telling him to quit his quest to help her daughter. She spoke with disturbing honesty about what she had done, admitting to burning Alessa. Later, outside Alchemilla Hospital, Dahlia appeared again, accusing Travis of setting Alessa free and allowing her to distort the town into the other world. She saw Travis as an obstacle to her plans, an outsider who was interfering with the Order's ritual. The climax of Silent Hill Origins came when Travis reached the ritual room beneath the Green Lion antiques. There, he found Alessa's burned body, surrounded by Order members preparing to complete their ceremony. In a confrontation that existed partially in a dreamlike vision, Travis faced a demon manifestation within the Floros, containing its power within the pyramid-shaped device. With this accomplished, Alessa was able to fully unleash her supernatural abilities. Outside Alchemilla Hospital, Alessa demonstrated her powers to Travis and Dahlia. She levitated, her burned body rising into the air, waves of supernatural energy radiating from her. In this moment of power, Alessa accomplished what she had been preparing for. She split her soul in half. Using the Floros to channel and control her abilities, she created a baby from half of her soul, a pure infant untainted by the trauma she had experienced. This was the baby that Harry and Jody would find. In the good ending of Silent Hill Origins, as Travis finally managed to return to his truck and leave Silent Hill, he saw one final vision. In his rearview mirror, he glimpsed Alessa's astral form holding the baby, smiling for perhaps the first time since her ordeal began. This image faded as Travis drove away, unaware that he had participated in something that would have far-reaching consequences. The ending also revealed what happened next. Through a static radio message, Travis overheard a couple calling for help. They had found a baby by the side of the road. This was Harry and Jody Mason finding Cheryl. A second radio transmission followed, this one between Dahlia Gillespie and Dr. Kaufmann. They discussed their next move, plotting how to cast a spell to bring the baby back to Silent Hill one day. Dahlia stated her intention to use a summoning spell to compel Cheryl to reunite with her other half, setting in motion the events that would unfold 7 years later. With Alessa's soul split and hidden, Dahlia had to adapt her plans. She could not complete the ritual immediately, but she could wait. She had already proven her patience by maintaining Alessa in her tormented state. Now she would extend that patience for 7 more years, keeping Alessa alive in Alchemilla Hospital, maintaining her magical incantation and using the girl's suffering to create a subconscious pull on the other half of her soul. During this time, Silent Hill continued to change. The other world that Alessa had created grew stronger, seeping deeper into the town's fabric, creating the fog-shrouded nightmare realm that would trap Harry Mason when he finally arrived. Dahlia also used these years to maintain her position in Silent Hill and continue her influence over the Order. She remained the proprietor of Green Lion Antiques, maintaining her public persona while working behind the scenes to prepare for the eventual return of Alessa's other half. Her criminal enterprises with Dr. Kaufmann continued, the drug trade providing funding and leverage over key individuals in the town. Dahlia's web of influence extended throughout Silent Hill, ensuring that when the time came to complete her ritual, she would have the resources and power necessary to succeed. During this period, Dahlia also influenced other individuals who would play significant roles in Silent Hill's dark history. She maintained contact with Claudia Wolf, the young girl who had been Alessa's childhood friend. Claudia had grown up within the Order, subjected to continued abuse from her father, Leonard Wolf. According to Vincent Smith, a member of the Order, Claudia was totally brainwashed by Dahlia during this time. Dahlia's teachings and influence would shape Claudia into the fanatic she would become in Silent Hill 3, someone who genuinely believed in the Order's goals and would attempt to complete what Dahlia had started. Dahlia also extended her influence to a boy named Walter Sullivan, who lived at the Wish House Orphanage, the Order-run facility in the woods outside Silent Hill. Walter had been abandoned as a baby in room 302 of South Ashfield Heights apartment building in the town of Ashfield. He had been taken in by the Order and raised in the orphanage, where he was subjected to abuse and cult indoctrination. When Walter was 6 years old and had just learned to read and write, Dahlia visited the orphanage and told him something that would define his entire life. Dahlia informed Walter that his mother was asleep in Ashfield, in the room where he had been born. She told him that if he did a good job reading the text known as the 21 Sacraments for the descent of the Holy Mother, he could be reunited with his mother. Walter, desperate for maternal love and lacking any real understanding of what a parent truly was, misinterpreted what Dahlia told him. Instead of believing his mother was in room 302, he came to believe that his mother was room 302 itself, that the apartment was a living entity waiting for him to wake her. Dahlia's manipulation of Walter was part of the rivalry between different sects within the Order. The sect of the Holy Mother, which ran the Wish House Orphanage, was using Walter as a potential conjurer for the 21 Sacraments ritual, a different method of bringing about God's birth than the one Dahlia's sect of the Holy Woman was using with Alessa. By telling Walter that his mother was in Ashfield, Dahlia may have been attempting to sabotage the Holy Mother sect's plans, or to create an alternative method of achieving the Order's goals if her own plan with Alessa failed. Walter began making regular trips from the orphanage to Ashfield, taking the subway or bus, an enormous journey for a small child. He would visit South Ashfield Heights apartment building, trying to peek into room 302, the place he believed to be his mother. He slipped letters under the door, asking his mother why she would not wake up, begging to be let inside. The residents of the building came to know and fear this strange, obsessive boy who kept returning week after week, year after year. Throughout his childhood at Wish House, Walter was taught the Order's scriptures and forced to read the text of the 21 sacraments. A priest named George Roston secretly implanted the essence of Valtiel, an angel or demonic entity of the Order, into Walter's subconscious. This gave Walter supernatural abilities and prepared him to perform the ritual that would require him to murder 21 people. Dahlia continued to monitor Walter's progress, checking on his development, referring to herself in his diary entries as the important lady. Her influence over him would have consequences that extended far beyond her death, as Walter would eventually commit his crimes, becoming one of the most notorious serial killers in Silent Hill's history. But all of Dahlia's side projects and contingency plans were secondary to her main goal, the completion of the ritual with Alessa. When Harry Mason's car crashed outside Silent Hill and Cheryl disappeared into the town, Dahlia knew that the moment she had been waiting for had finally arrived. Now she needed to manipulate events carefully to ensure that Cheryl and Alessa would be reunited, that the two halves of the soul would merge, and that God would finally be born. Harry Mason woke from his car crash to find himself alone in his vehicle. Cheryl was gone, seemingly having run off into the fog-covered town. He set out to find her, entering the Silent Hill nightmare that Alessa had created. The town Harry experienced was a shifting horror, alternating between an eerie, fog-shrouded version of a normal town and the nightmarish otherworld of rust, blood, and monsters. As Harry searched desperately for his daughter, he encountered various people who seemed to be trapped in the town's nightmare with him, including Sybil Bennett, a police officer from the neighboring town of Brahms. Harry also encountered a woman who seemed to be simply a concerned bystander at first, Dahlia Gillespie. She approached him with warnings and cryptic advice, presenting herself as someone who understood what was happening in Silent Hill and wanted to help. She spoke in religious language, describing demons and supernatural forces, referring to symbols and seals that Harry did not understand. Dahlia was playing a careful game, positioning herself as an ally while actually manipulating Harry toward her ultimate goal. Dahlia gave Harry critical information, but it was information designed to mislead and control him. She told him about Alessa, but portrayed the girl as a demon who needed to be stopped. She explained that Alessa was trying to complete 5 mystical seals throughout the town, the seal of Metatron, which would plunge Silent Hill deeper into the otherworld and expand her dark influence. Dahlia presented this as a terrible thing that must be prevented. She instructed Harry to use a sacred object, the floros, to stop Alessa from completing the seals. In reality, Dahlia was inverting the truth. Alessa was indeed trying to place the seal of Metatron throughout Silent Hill, but not to expand the other world. She was attempting to contain it, to keep the nightmare from spreading beyond the town's boundaries. The seal of Metatron was a protective talisman, not a tool of darkness. Alessa was trying to prevent Dahlia from completing the ritual and forcing the birth of God. Dahlia's manipulation of Harry was particularly clever because she used religious misdirection. She referred to the seal of Metatron as the mark of Samael, invoking the name of a demon rather than an angel. She met Harry in Christian churches, presenting herself as someone working for the forces of good against demonic evil. She played on Harry's desperation to find Cheryl and his willingness to believe that he could help save the town. Every interaction was calculated to move Harry closer to betraying Alessa and enabling Dahlia's true goal. Harry, not knowing the truth, followed Dahlia's instructions. He pursued Alessa throughout Silent Hill, interrupting her attempts to place the seal of Metatron in key locations. He believed he was saving the town, preventing a demon from spreading darkness. In reality, he was helping Dahlia dismantle the only defense Alessa had created against the completion of the ritual. The manipulation culminated at the lakeside amusement park. Harry arrived there ahead of Alessa, and when she appeared, he confronted her, demanding Cheryl back. Alessa tried to push him away with her powers, but at that moment, the floros activated. The pyramid-shaped device that Dahlia had given Harry, telling him it was a sacred tool to stop Alessa, was actually a trap. The floros locked onto Alessa's supernatural power and imprisoned her, rendering her helpless. Dahlia appeared at the amusement park as Harry stood over the trapped Alessa. The look of triumph on Dahlia's face must have been the first indication Harry had that something was terribly wrong. The other world that Alessa had been holding together through sheer will began to collapse, mixing different locations into an impossible space. Reality became even more fluid and nightmarish as Dahlia's plan reached its final stage. Harry found himself transported to a location known simply as Nowhere, a place that was part otherworld and part manifestation of the Gillespie house itself. It was here, in this transfigured space that reflected the site of Alessa's original burning, that Dahlia prepared to complete the ritual she had begun 7 years earlier. Harry arrived just as the soul was being reunited with Alessa's burned body. Cheryl, who had been drawn through the town by the pull of her other half, merged with Alessa, making the vessel complete once more. Dahlia then revealed the truth to Harry, explaining most of what had been happening, though still concealing certain details. She told him about Alessa's burning 7 years ago, about how the girl had been kept alive in a state of suffering to nurture the God growing inside her. She explained that Cheryl was the other half of Alessa's soul, the part that had escaped during the ritual, and that Harry had been manipulated into bringing her back. Dahlia spoke of the God's imminent birth and the paradise that would follow, her voice filled with religious fervor and triumph. As Dahlia explained her plan, the reunited Alessa's body began to transform. The two souls merged together, and the God that had been gestating for 7 years prepared to emerge. Depending on Harry's actions throughout the game, specifically whether he had saved Dr. Kaufmann in an earlier encounter, the final confrontation would play out in 2 different ways. If Harry had not saved Kaufmann, Alessa transformed into a being called the Incubator, a glowing figure in white robes that represented Alessa's image of God. This form attacked Harry, and during the battle, it turned on Dahlia, setting her aflame. The fire consumed Dahlia, burning her alive in a form of poetic justice that mirrored what she had done to her daughter 7 years earlier. If Harry had saved Kaufmann from a monster attack earlier in the game, the ending played out differently. Just after the God manifested as the Incubator, Dr. Kaufmann burst into the chamber. He was enraged, having been drawn into the other world against his will, betrayed by Dahlia despite his years of service to her and the Order. Kaufmann had brought a weapon, a vial of aglaophotis, a substance derived from white Claudia that could expel demons. Kaufmann shot Dahlia with his revolver, wounding her but not killing her immediately. He demanded that she reverse everything, that she return things to normal. Dahlia, even wounded, taunted him, telling him his usefulness was over. In response, Kaufmann threw his vial of aglaophotis at the Incubator. The substance splashed across the glowing figure, and its effect was immediate and catastrophic. The aglaophotis forced a premature birth. Instead of the benevolent deity Dahlia had envisioned, the god that emerged from Alessa's back was a demon called the Incubus. This creature resembled the entity Baphomet from occult tradition, a winged, horned monstrosity that represented Dahlia's own mental image of what God should look like. The Incubus was not a being of paradise, but of destruction and chaos, the result of a birth forced by violence and suffering, rather than faith and devotion. The Incubus's first act was to kill Dahlia. It struck her with lightning, the orange electrical energy coursing through her body. She was set ablaze by the demon she had spent her entire life trying to birth. Dahlia Gillespie died in flames, just as she had burned her daughter, just as she had burned so many others in her fanatical pursuit of power and paradise. Her last moments were spent witnessing the transformation of her grand design into a mockery, her God made manifest as a destructive force rather than a savior. Harry Mason fought the incubus in a desperate battle and ultimately defeated it. The demon's death caused the otherworld to begin collapsing. A fading apparition of Alessa, finally free from her torment, created a portal back to the real world. She handed Harry a newborn baby, a child that contained the fused souls of Alessa and Cheryl, reborn once again. Alessa had managed one final act of resistance, saving Harry and creating a new life from the ruins of her suffering. Harry escaped Silent Hill with the baby, whom he named Cheryl once again, raising her as his daughter. She would grow up to be Heather Mason, the protagonist of Silent Hill 3. But the god fetus remained within her, dormant, waiting for another fanatic to attempt its birth. Dahlia Gillespie was dead, her body consumed by the demon she had created, but her influence did not end with her death. The seed she had planted, the manipulations she had performed, and the trauma she had inflicted continued to shape Silent Hill and the lives of those connected to it. Her greatest legacy was the corruption of two individuals who would attempt to complete what she had started: Claudia Wolfe and Walter Sullivan. 17 years after Dahlia's death, Claudia Wolfe, now a high priestess of the Order, set in motion a plan to birth God using Heather Mason. Claudia had been completely indoctrinated into the Order's beliefs, shaped by Dahlia's influence during her childhood. Unlike Dahlia, Claudia was a true believer who genuinely thought that birthing God would save humanity from suffering. She had witnessed Alessa's pain as a child and had been taught by Dahlia that suffering was the key to creating a merciful paradise. Claudia's plan involved filling Heather with hatred and suffering to nourish the dormant god fetus inside her. She arranged for Harry Mason to be murdered by the missionary, a monster under her control. This act was meant to fill Heather with rage and grief, providing the negative emotions necessary for God's growth. Claudia pursued Heather throughout Silent Hill 3, manipulating events to force the girl towards the final confrontation. When Heather finally confronted Claudia in the Order's chapel, she had already swallowed an aglaophotis pill that Harry had placed inside a pendant he gave her for protection. The substance caused Heather to vomit up the god fetus before it could fully mature. But Claudia, seeing the fetus, made a desperate choice. She swallowed it herself, allowing God to be born through her body instead. The God that emerged from Claudia resembled Alessa, Claudia's childhood friend, and the person she associated most strongly with divinity. But this God was incomplete and malformed, influenced by Heather's hatred and shaped by the traumatic circumstances of its birth. Heather destroyed this manifestation of God, and Claudia died in the process. In her final moments, Claudia may have realized the truth about what she had been taught, about whether the paradise she believed in was ever real. In the confessional booth of the Order's chapel, there appears a woman whose identity is never confirmed, but is believed by many fans to be a spiritual manifestation of Dahlia. The voice actress is different from Dahlia's original performance, and the character refers to her poor murdered daughter and the girl whose life she has taken. If this truly is Dahlia's spirit, it suggests that after 17 years in some form of purgatory, she finally realized the magnitude of her crimes. She begs for Alessa's forgiveness and God's forgiveness, recognizing too late the evil she had committed. The influence Dahlia had on Walter Sullivan also bore terrible fruit years after her death. Walter had spent his childhood being indoctrinated into the Order's beliefs, convinced that Room 302 was his mother and that he could awaken her through the 21 Sacraments ritual. At age 24, he began his killing spree, murdering 10 people in as many days. He removed their hearts and carved numbers into their bodies, preparing for the ritual that would supposedly reunite him with his mother. Walter was eventually captured, convicted, and imprisoned. While in prison, he committed suicide by stabbing himself in the neck with a metal soup spoon, severing his carotid artery. But this death was actually the 11th sacrament, a ritual suicide that allowed Walter to transcend death and continue his murders as a ghost. He completed the 21 sacraments over the following years, killing 21 people in total, including innocent victims like children Billy and Miriam LeCain. Walter's crimes were a direct result of Dahlia's manipulation. She had planted the lie about Room 302 being his mother, had monitored his progress in learning the 21 sacraments, and had set him on a path that would lead to mass murder. Her influence over him made her indirectly responsible for the deaths of his 21 victims and the trauma inflicted on countless others. Dahlia's reach extended beyond her own life, beyond Silent Hill itself, corrupting and destroying lives through the pawns she had positioned years before her death. The pattern that emerges from Dahlia's story is one of fanaticism leading to destruction. She believed absolutely in the Order's vision of paradise, or at least used that belief to justify her actions. She was willing to commit any atrocity, to sacrifice anyone, including her own daughter, in pursuit of this goal. But every attempt to birth God resulted in horror. The deity that emerged was never the benevolent creator of paradise that the Order envisioned, but a destructive force shaped by suffering and hatred. Dahlia's character embodies several troubling themes. First is the corruption of maternal love. A mother is supposed to protect and nurture her child, to put the child's welfare above all else. Dahlia inverted this relationship, viewing her daughter purely as a tool, a vessel to be used for her own purposes. The burning of Alessa represents the ultimate betrayal of the maternal bond, the transformation of a mother into a monster. Second is the danger of religious extremism. The Order's beliefs might have started with genuine spiritual seeking, but they evolved into a death cult, willing to torture children and murder anyone who interfered with their plans. Dahlia represents how faith can be twisted into fanaticism, how the pursuit of an abstract paradise can be used to justify concrete atrocities. Her religious language, her talk of God and paradise, served as a mask for cruelty and a hunger for power. Third is the theme of power and control. Dahlia's ultimate goal may have been to birth God, but her methods reveal a desire for personal power. She wanted to be the mother of God, to control the deity's birth, to be the architect of the new world. Her drug trafficking, her murders of the mayor and narcotics officer, her manipulation of everyone around her, all demonstrate someone who craved dominance and was willing to use any means to achieve it. Finally, there is the theme of consequences and legacy. Dahlia's actions set in motion a chain of events that corrupted Silent Hill for decades. The town itself became a manifestation of trauma, a place where nightmares became real, where the past could not be escaped. Alessa's suffering created the other world, and that dark reflection continued to trap and torment people long after both Alessa and Dahlia were dead. Claudia Wolfe and Walter Sullivan carried forward Dahlia's corrupting influence, attempting to complete her work or falling victim to her manipulations. Dahlia Gillespie serves as a tragic villain, but not in the sense that her suffering makes her sympathetic. The tragedy is in what she chose to become, in the evil she willingly embraced. She had opportunities to turn away from the path she was on. When Alessa split her soul and created Cheryl, Dahlia could have accepted defeat and let her daughter find peace. When 7 years passed, with Alessa suffering in Alchemilla Hospital, Dahlia could have chosen mercy and released her daughter from torment. But at every juncture, Dahlia chose power over compassion, her vision of paradise over the welfare of real people. In the end, Dahlia Gillespie was consumed by the very fire she had wielded as a weapon. The God she had spent her life trying to birth killed her, and her death solved nothing. The trauma she had inflicted, the corruption she had spread, and the suffering she had caused continued long after she was gone. Silent Hill remained cursed, twisted by the anguish of a child she had burned. The people she had manipulated continued to act out her terrible designs. Her legacy was not paradise, but endless suffering. And yet, there were moments of resistance and redemption in the wake of Dahlia's evil. Alessa, despite all she endured, found the strength to split her soul and save half of herself from corruption. She created Cheryl, who would grow up as Heather, loved by Harry Mason and ultimately strong enough to resist the Order's manipulations. Harry himself, an ordinary man thrust into nightmare, fought to save a daughter who was not even his biological child, showing the kind of selfless parental love that Dahlia had utterly lacked. Lisa Garland, despite being forced to participate in Alessa's torment through blackmail and addiction, eventually found a form of redemption. In death, she returned to stop Dr. Kaufmann from escaping the consequences of his actions, dragging him down into the darkness as the other world collapsed. Even in her torment, she maintained enough humanity to seek justice. The story of Dahlia Gillespie is a horror story, but it is also a story about the resilience of those who suffer and the strength required to resist evil. It asks difficult questions about faith, family, and the nature of suffering. Can a paradise built on torture be anything but hell? Can a God born from pain create anything but more pain? Can a mother who burns her child ever be anything but a monster? The answer Silent Hill gives us is clear. Dahlia Gillespie's attempt to birth God resulted demons. Her pursuit of paradise created nightmares. Her role as a mother became a mockery of that sacred bond. And in the end, the flames that consumed her were a fitting conclusion to a life spent burning others. As we close our journey through Dahlia's story, we are left with the image of a woman who sacrificed everything and everyone, including her own daughter, in pursuit of a vision that was always a lie. The paradise she sought never existed. The God she tried to birth was never real. What was real was the pain she caused, the lives she destroyed, and the darkness she spread through Silent Hill and beyond. Dahlia Gillespie, the mother who burned her daughter, stands as one of horror gaming's most disturbing villains precisely because her evil was so intimate. She did not destroy from a distance or kill strangers. She tortured her own child, twisted motherhood into abuse, and wrapped it all in religious justification. Her story is a reminder that the most terrible monsters are often those who claim to act in the name of higher purposes, those who sacrifice others for visions of a better world that will never come. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the darkness of Silent Hill and the heart of one of its most complex antagonists. If you enjoyed this exploration of Dahlia Gillespie, please like and subscribe. Your support helps me continue to bring you these deep dives into gaming lore, helping you drift off to sleep with stories of worlds both wondrous and terrible. Until next time, sleep well, and may your dreams be gentler than the nightmares of Silent Hill.